A Body to Die For, a Stan Kraychik mystery, Book 1. Author Grant Michaels, publisher Stonewall Inn Press, narrator Eric Ost. Chapter 5. Dust the Place for Blueprints. With so much time and the weather so cooperative, I risked taking the T to Harvard Square. T is short for the MTA, which is short for MBTA, which stands for Massachusetts Bay Transit Authority, which is Boston's ancient and chronically ailing public transportation system. The Red Line subway has a station on Charles Street, and the best way there from the Salon is through the Boston Public Garden. Even in the clear sunlight, everything in the garden showed signs of winter's impending gloom. Last night's rain had become a frost that killed what was left of the autumn flowers, leaving gray wilted blossoms on crunchy brown twigs, typical friendly fall weather for Boston. Though the pond had not yet been drained, the swan boats were already dry docked for the oncoming winter, so the charm of the big white birds gliding their passengers serenely over the water was gone. Only the tree brandished a last flourish of life, with foliage streaked in blood-danced hues of orange, yellow, red, and green. The walk along Charles Street was more pleasant, reminded me that Boston is at once quaint and modern. Real estate firms garnering commissions since the arrival of the Mayflower adjoined chic Italian gelato parlors, specialty brokers purveying Chippendale and Applewhite originals abutted trendy French caricatures. In the T station, the train arrived surprisingly soon, and the ride was fast and direct, unlike the usual interrupted journey with shuttle buses between stations along the route. Harvard Square was lively and full of students. The warm autumn sun encouraged many of them to don shorts and tank tops and even go bare-chested. I appreciated the tangle of legs and shoulders and faces of the more stalwart young Harvard men. After a brief loiter along Brattle Street, I got a cab. When I told the driver my destination, he said, "You going to the Choate factory?" "It's pronounced chote," I said. "Rhymes with throat." "That's so." The cabbie snorted the viscous contents of his sinuses and swallowed hard. Then he swerved the car into the approaching traffic, and we zoomed off. He continued, "That's where the faggot killer works, you know?" "Excuse me?" "You seen the papers today?" "Not yet." Actually, I had seen the Globe's tiny story, but I figured he'd speak more freely if I acted stupid. "Oh, sure," the cab said. "It was in the Herald on the front page, the whole story about this fag killing. Geez, no one around here's seen it. Don't anyone read the Herald?" "Probably not in Harvard Square." I made a mental note to find a copy. Suddenly we turned off Brattle Street and headed toward the Charles River, which I knew was the wrong direction. Then we made a series of sharp turns as though we were in a maze. "Where are you going?" I asked. "It should be directly off Brattle Street," the cabbie retorted. "What do you want? It's all one-way streets and dead ends around here. I'm not trying to cheat you." A dubious song, I thought. After 20 minutes of aimless swerving, we stopped in front of a high wooden fence of solid 8-foot planks painted a tasteful gray. The cabbie pointed to the fence and said, "It's in there. No cars allowed, so I gotta leave you here." I paid him the exact amount and got out of the cab. He said, "Hey!" I answered back, "I don't tip drivers who jack up the meter with extra mileage." He squalled off before I could even slam the cab door. I followed the fence and found the entrance to the property. Inside was an immense 3-story mansion from the late 1800s. The cabbie had lied. There was a parking lot, and it was filled with German and Swedish luxury sedans. Personally, I prefer the zest of an Italian roadster over those staid mobile lounges, but that could simply be my fascination with anything Mediterranean. I walked up a flagstone path bordered with neatly trimmed hedges. The pungent smell of recent landscaping reminded me of the persistent cedar and balsam aroma that lingered around Lieutenant Branco. There was also the smell of new paint, and once I got closer to the building, I was astonished to discover the whole structure was brand new, not even a few years old. Talk about a trompe l'oeil. The front entranceway was a big, paneled double door painted bright red. I'd barely pushed against the right-hand door when it silently and automatically opened itself for me, and I entered a world completely contradicting the outside of the building. The interior was a cavernous, sky-lit atrium surrounded by 3 levels of glass-enclosed offices. 2 long, shallow ramps interconnected the 3 floors along each side of the building, and a glass elevator provided lift at the far end. Small trees and flowering shrubs were everywhere in sight, and the burbling sound of water cascading down a layered, rocky fountain completed the effect of an enclosed tropical rainforest. The receptionist was seated squarely in front of me as I walked into the open area. His simple desk, 3 slabs of oiled walnut, 2 vertical, 1 horizontal, allowed me a good look at the whole body. He was young, clean-shaven and dressed in a la preppy khaki chinos, blue Oxford cloth shirt, silk rep tie, and soft brown Italian slip-ons, with tassels on a low-cut vamp. Lavender argyle socks completed the look. "Can I help you?" he asked with contrived politeness. "I'm here to see Calvin Redding." "The name is Harrington," I lied. "Carlisle Harrington." The young man squeezed his thin lips even tighter and said, "I'm afraid Mr. Redding is unavailable today, but I have an appointment. He has some very important papers concerning my property in Dover." The receptionist didn't answer me, but pressed a lighted panel built flush into the desktop in front of him. Then he spoke wearily into the air, and for a moment I thought he was talking to me. "A Mr. Harrington is here to see Calvin. Do you think you can help him?" I studied him closely and saw that he was wearing a nearly invisible headset and microphone. Then he said directly to me, "Miss Doughton will see you. She's Mr. Redding's colleague." Within seconds, I heard a heavy door slam somewhere on one of the upper levels. I looked upward and saw what seemed to be an enormous eggplant wearing a tailored jacket and skirt emerge from an office on the 2nd level. Rather than walk down the shallow ramp near her office, she waddled to the hydraulic lift at the far end of the building and descended that way. Then she hauled her bulky body the length of the sky-lit atrium toward me. She seemed bound and constrained by her tight purple business suit. "Mr. Harrington?" She spoke with a low, rough voice, already out of breath from the slight exertion of walking. I nodded. "Yes. I'm Jennifer Doughton. I work with Calvin Redding." Her voice sounded permanently hoarse from years of unfiltered cigarettes and bourbon. "You wanted to see me?" I explained. "I'm remodeling a house in Dover on Frog Pond Lane." A wealthy client had once explained that the truly rich never refer to their domicile as a home. It's always a house, whether an English Tudor manor or a one-room country little shack. I went on. "The contractors are ready to work, but they can't begin without the plans. Since Calvin is not available, perhaps you can open his office so I can get the papers?" She frowned and said, "That won't be necessary. We share the same office. I can find what you're looking for." She turned and I followed her. She stopped immediately and remarked, "There's no need for you to accompany me." Her voice was like the rasp of a dull file on hardwood. "It's no trouble at all," I answered. She paused and stared at me with suspecting eyes. When she finally moved her mass again, I walked alongside her toward the elevator. Annoyance appeared in her voice. "It's unusual that I haven't met you before. Calvin and I often serve the same clients as a team." I chuckled casually. "Well, you see, Calvin is doing me a favor. We've been working on the plans for remodeling my house for quite a while, but most of the work has been done outside the office." Jennifer Doughton smirked, and I wondered if she believed me. I could usually tell by the eyes, but all I could see in her was anger and hardness. She wasn't pleased with her life in this world. We glided silently up one flight in the hydraulically controlled elevator. Once inside the office she and Calvin shared, she began a haphazard search through a big cabinet full of color-coded manila folders. Within minutes she was out of breath. She gasped heavily and said, "There's only one other place it could be," and she lumbered out of the office. I saw my chance and I grabbed it. So what if one entire wall of the office was open plate glass and I was exposed? The question was where to begin. I needed names and dates. So Calvin's calendar and phone directory seemed the logical places. But his desk was locked. Maybe he had everything computerized. I looked at the computer terminal near his desk. It was turned on, so I pressed a key marked Enter. It beeped at me and displayed Enter User ID. I typed Calvin's name, but that only caused User Authorization Failure. Please try again. I tried using his initials, then various combinations of his name and initials. Every try failed. I became frantic and typed anything, no matter how illogical, but all I got was a beep, beep, beep. I was so engrossed that I didn't realize I wasn't alone anymore. What they say about big people being light on their feet is true. "You need a password," she muttered hoarsely, directly behind me. Her voice startled me, but I covered my surprise. "These computers are remarkable. I just couldn't resist trying it out." I turned in the chair to face her. "Maybe someday I'll learn how to use one." Jeannie said, "Maybe someday you'll come up with a better story. There is no record of your contact with Calvin Redding, and furthermore, the property you described in Dover doesn't even exist. Now, would you like to tell me who you are and what you're doing here? Or shall I just call the police?" I wet my lips and tried to speak evenly, though my heart was pounding. "I don't think we need the police." "Then talk, mister, whoever you are." After a horribly long pause, during which my cool pink skin had turned hot scarlet, I said, "Okay. I heard Calvin was in trouble. I'm a friend." My voice sounded dry and hollow, a sure sign that my nerves had taken over. It was mantra time. I'm trying to get to his records and pull out any incriminating stuff before the police see it. Jeannie accepted this with a kindly smile. "How chivalrous." "So, if I could just see?" she snapped. "You're lying. I've worked with Calvin Redding for almost 2 years, and I know the kind of friends he has. None of them would be here trying to help him out." "I'm not like the others." She picked up the phone on her desk. "Patrick, call the—" Okay. I pressed my finger into the phone cradle to stop the call. "The jig is up. I'm Calvin's hairdresser." Jenny crackled. "You expect me to believe that?" "It's the truth." I snapped out a business card, but she ignored it. "Look, mister, whatever you're trying to prove, you're too late anyway. The police have already come and gone. They've taken all of Calvin's papers with them." "Damn!" That meant Branco had everything. But I've got to find out what happened between Calvin and that guy who was killed yesterday. Jenny brayed a raucous hee-haw. "I don't give a hoot about that. In fact, I hope Calvin's guilty." With those words, everything between us changed. Suddenly, Big Jeannie and I had more in common than I thought. "You mean," I said quietly and distinctly, "you'd like to see Calvin convicted?" She lowered her eyes, and I noticed sadly that even her eyelids seemed flabby. My concern over love handles seemed a pathetic vanity compared to this woman's problems. Jeannie said, "With Calvin out of the way, my career might start moving forward again." She sounded almost sorry to have to say it. "What do you mean?" I asked, benign as a father confessor. She lit a cigarette. I was right, no filter. She filled her lungs a few times and left a soggy lip print on the cigarette end. Nicole would have disapproved. Then Jeannie spoke. "Calvin breezed into town after touring Europe for a couple of years. He was supposed to be doing an apprenticeship over there. But it wasn't that at all. It was a vacation, the kind only people like Calvin can take. Meaning, a lot of money, drugs, and sex." "How do you know that?" "I have all ways of finding out things." Then he landed a job here as a staff architect. No drifting board for him, just directly to a staff title, and from there, he skips up to an associate position, the title that took me 10 years to earn. Calvin Redding got handed to him in less than 2. Maybe he's just talented. I played devil's advocate just to keep her talking. Calvin Redding's talent hangs between his legs. Jeannie's eyes were dark and mean now. I'll tell you something, mister. There's a junior partnership coming up here, and Calvin and I are both in line for it. I've got the seniority and the proven past. I was working here when 5 people had to put in 16-hour days just to survive. I deserve that position. I gave her my compassionate therapist look, the look that meant I understand, but I said nothing. She went on. The way Calvin sucks up to the boss is disgusting, and it's obviously just because Brickley has a name and connections. Who's Brickley? Ray Brickley's the boss, but I'm talking too much. No, you're not, Jeannie. I wonder if we might be able to help each other. She didn't answer, but buried herself in a cloud of smoke. After a moment, she said, How can you help me? I think we have similar hopes for Calvin's future. I thought you were trying to help him. I shook my head so hard my hair fell out of place. No way. I said that so you'd let me see his papers. I'm looking for incriminating evidence, all right? But I don't want to protect him. I want to use it against him. I have a feeling he killed that ranger, and I need proof. You change your story minute by minute. Jeannie, the police suspect me in that killing too, but I didn't do it. I've got to clear myself, and if it means convicting Calvin, well, that's fine with me. An evil smile crept over Jeannie's mouth. She wheezed heavily, then took a long drag from her cigarette. You don't like him much either, do you? She said. No, I don't. He exploits people. He thinks he's royalty. He doesn't do a thing for himself, much less for anyone else. He lies. He's cheap. Okay, mister, you're convincing me. Maybe we can help each other. A small victory. What do you need to know? She asked. Anything about Roger Fairbrook, the guy from Yosemite who was killed? How'd you know he was from Yosemite? She asked. That's what he told me. Jenny's eyes flashed on me. So, you'd met him already? Yes, in the hair salon yesterday. She mulled this while she squinted at me through the acrid smoke. All I can tell you is that Calvin brought him here yesterday morning and bragged about the night they spent together. That was it. That's all? Nothing more? I'm sure there's a lot more, mister, but one of the people who knows it is dead and the other one is in jail. I wondered who and where the rest were. So this place does know Calvin's in jail. Of course we do. But we don't go announcing it to our clients. It's not exactly a merit badge to have an associate in jail. Jeannie, do you think Calvin could have killed Roger? I wouldn't put anything past him. What would make him do it? Jeannie banged her cigarette against an ashtray already mounded high with charred butts and dusty ash. He probably said something honest to Calvin's face. But even Calvin wouldn't kill someone just for doing that. There has to be more. Jeannie closed her eyes, probably to keep the stagnant, oily smoke out of them. People have been killed for a lot less than telling the truth. I nodded as though I understood, though I didn't. I offered her my business card again. Would you call me if you think of anything else that might help? She took it in her plump, dimpled fingers and said, I thought your name was Stan. I go by Vanos in the shop. She wrote Stan on the card and slid it into the snug breast pocket of her jacket. At least you got balls, which is more than I can say for Calvin's other tricks. Hey, don't get that ideal. I never had sex with him. I never wanted to and never intend to. Another point in your favor. And thanks for not calling the police, Jeannie. As I said, I'm already under suspicion, so I'm trying to keep out of their sight. Her eyes had softened somewhat, and I got a glimpse of a keen intelligence working behind them. Don't let the police bully you, she said. I left her office and stopped near the reception desk to call a cab. While I was doing that, a handsome man walked by me. He looked like one of J.C. Leyendeckers' Arrow shirt men, but older, maybe 50. He was in shirt sleeves and slacks, both tailored to show off his muscular physique. I thought he looked damn good. He caught my gaze and he nodded politely. "Good afternoon," he said as he passed by. His cologne smelled like a citrus grove on a cool, dewy morning. I overheard Patrick, the receptionist, say to him, "Mr. Brickley, that's the man who wanted to see Calvin." Since I was the only other person around, I knew he was referring to me. I stopped my call and did a quick Dior turn to face the man. "Are you Mr. Brickley?" He smiled cautiously. "Yes, I am." I hung up the phone and went to him. Close up, I saw that his light gray slacks had subtle pinstripes of pink and apricot. A silk Hermes tie of slate blue and gold complemented a pale papaya-colored cotton shirt. "I'm a friend of Calvin Redding," I said. "I'd like to talk to you." He paused a moment, unsure, then he said cordially, "I'm sure I have a few minutes for a friend of Calvin. Let's go up to my office." He put his hand heavily on my shoulder. "What's your name?" "Stan Kraychik," he said. "That sounds Czech." "It is." We started toward the elevator, then stopped. "Why don't we take the ramps? That's better than the lift." I left to keep fit. Too many people these days are idle and don't appreciate the importance of physical activity and a healthy body. A healthy mind and a healthy body are codependent. Blah, 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 he went. I sensed that his polished appearance was only the veneer over a suppressed chatterbox. Inside, I wondered what this physical culturist would think of my self-improvement campaign to learn to smoke. His office was on the top level of the 3-story building. Up there, through the top of the atrium, I could see part of a huge bank of solar panels facing southward on the roof. Most of the offices on that level had vertical blinds across the glass walls for privacy, unlike the offices on the second level, where all activity was exposed. Mr. Brickley settled himself behind a huge rosewood desk, while I sat in a comfortable side chair of the same rosewood upholstered in mauve-colored leather. He said, "How can I help you, Mr. Kraychik?" "I'm trying to find out about a young man named Roger Fairbrook." Ron Brickley's face showed a flash of surprise that disappeared instantly. "I'm afraid I don't know the name. Perhaps you'd remember the face and body. Tall, light-haired, mustached, gentle voice. He was visiting from the West." "Still no connection. What does this have to do with Calvin Redding?" "I know that Calvin brought him here the other day, showed him around the place. I thought maybe you'd met him." Mr. Brickley thought a moment. "Maybe I do remember him. You say he had a good build on him, huh?" I nodded. "I think I may remember seeing him." "Do you know why he was here?" Roy Brickley repositioned himself in his chair, then said, "I have no idea. You probably know that Calvin Redding is suspected of killing him." The man pinched his mouth up, then spoke with a barb on his controlled words. "That's an outrageous accusation, especially of one of our associates." "But it's true, Mr. Brickley." He squirmed again, and his chair creaked. Then he spoke with resignation, as though caught in a lie. "Yes, I know it's true, but it's only a suspicion, and I'm certain the police are wrong. The Choate brothers believes, as I myself personally believe, of course, that such a thing is not possible." "Of course." "Nonetheless, I am distressed that one of our associates is in such a dire situation, since we know he is innocent. But I can personally vouch for Calvin Redding's character. My wife and I have entertained Calvin Redding on numerous occasions, and I can assure you that there is no possible way on this earth that Calvin Redding could physically harm another person." It sounded like a statement prepared for the police and the reporters. I almost wanted to applaud, but instead I said, "It's too bad the police don't share your conviction." Roy Brickley said, "I've already spoken with the police, and frankly, they don't even have enough evidence for a proper charge. They'll be dealing with Calvin's attorney shortly." "For what?" "Unlawful detainer." "But Mr. Brickley, they do have evidence." "A lie. I've read the reports." That stopped him. "How did you manage that?" "It's public information for a fee." There was a loud knock on the door that had burst open, and Jennifer Doughton hauled her massive bulk into the room. She jolted to a halt when she saw me. Though her body rebounded a moment, she glared at me while she waved some papers and said to Roy Brickley, "These need your John Hancock before 2 o'clock?" He said, "Certainly, Jennifer. I'll see to it as soon as I'm finished here." She turned and left the room, closing the door with a ponderous thud. Mr. Brickley said, "Well, as you can see, I'm a busy man, and I have quite a full schedule today." I sensed that Jenny's interruption had broken the thread of our conversation, and that Roy Brickley was eager to be left alone, so I got up to leave. There's no reason in pressing people, especially if you might have to see them and use them again. I stood up and said, "Thanks for your time, Mr. Brickley." "Not at all. I want Calvin absolved of this monstrous accusation as soon as possible. I'm determined to settle the matter, too." He extended his hand, and I shook it. It was huge and strong. He said as he held onto my hand, "By the way, how do you know Calvin?" With no reason to lie, I told him. "I do his hair." "Really? What a fortunate coincidence. My wife has been trying desperately to find a new hairdresser." "There are plenty of us around," I said. "In my business, you're either being discovered or discarded." His grip on my hand wasn't loosening. "Calvin always looks good, and that's all the recommendation I'd need for your work. Where is your shop?" "I have a card here." I tugged my hand out of his, then got one of my cards. He took the card and examined it with his powerful fingers like a boxer handling Venetian glass. "Newberry Street. Good location. Near the Ritz, is it?" I nodded. "But your name isn't on here." "I go by Venos in the shop." Roy Brickley wrinkled his forehead. "Why not your own name?" "Stanley doesn't cut it in the world of fashion." "Well, in the world of business, Stanley Kraychik would be a fine name. I hope we'll be meeting each other again soon." "We probably will." I left his office and walked quickly down the 2 ramps to Patrick, the receptionist. "Can you call me a cab?" I asked in my sweetie pie voice. Patrick pressed his lips tightly together, then said haughtily, "There's one on the way, courtesy of Mr. Brickley." Was that jealousy I heard in his voice? A Gay Mysteries audiobooks. I think it is easy to hate a label, but a face humanizes the word. So this effort is twofold: to offer comfort to those like myself that your world didn't end because you don't fit into the view of acceptable society on both sides, and in hopes of helping those with family that are LGBTQ, that it doesn't mean we are aliens from the child they once knew. Reassure them so they can maybe be supportive at the same time, being true to their values.